The idea of one God translation of a fragment of a chapter Slavic deities from Religion of Pagan Slavs by Stanisław Ułabańczyk. Monotheism, henotheism, polytheism. Under the influence of Christian propaganda, a belief became established that pagans generally believed in many gods, that they worshipped pieces of wood or stone as gods, and that they were ultimately unfamiliar with the idea of a god who, if not the only one, was at least the supreme and real ruler of the world. This was, of course, said about the Slavs. This point of view was accidentally supported by science, which believed that the idea of God arose evolutionarily through abstraction from various concrete objects surrounded by divine worship. Several sources were pointed out from which these deified concrete objects originated, and then the idea of one God. Namely, primitive man personified in deified natural phenomena, treated objects as if they were alive and endowed them with hidden powers, personified the cause of phenomena, believing, for example, that good or bad fortune must have its giver, and assumed that the souls of the dead inhabit nature and interfere in human affairs. Each of these sources thus produced a number of demonic beings, and it was only through 1,000 years of evolution that the idea of a single, relatively supreme, among several others, God arose. This is a being or beings of great power, constant character, highly individualized, superior to the laws of nature. The term higher-order deities is often used to describe them. Against the backdrop of this fundamental view, doubts arose as to whether the pagan Slavs had managed to achieve a sufficiently high level of culture. Therefore, the historical sources, which attributed knowledge of the idea of a supreme god to the Slavs, were rejected. When I speak of a supreme god, I mean so-called henotheism. That is a situation in which a certain god constantly, or at least in some cases, pushes others so far into the background that it seems as if this god was the only one. This is what Helmholtz had in mind when he said that, compared to Sventovit, other deities appear to be demigods. However, there is another view, namely that belief in one god already existed at the lowest level of culture. It turned out that even the most primitive peoples recognized the existence of a supreme god. So either we must assume that monotheism is primitive, as Christian theology maintains, considering polytheism to be a later contamination, or that the evolution leading to the idea of a supreme God took place in times very distant from us. In our case, however, the choice is unnecessary, for it suffices that we need not shy away from accepting as true those passages in the Chronicles which attribute knowledge of this idea to the Slavs. There are two references. The first comes from the very south of the Slavic world, from the Byzantine historian Procopius, from a work written around 550. The Slavs recognize only one God, the ruler of thunder, the Lord of all, and to him alone they sacrifice oxen and other animals. They do not believe in fate and do not attribute any power over people to it. This is not absolute monotheism, but rather henotheism, since the same author says that the Slavs worship rivers, nymphs, and other deities. Procopius probably had in mind the same thing as Helmholtz, who wrote 600 years later in the northwestern corner of Slavic lands. Among the various deities to whom they dedicate fields and forests, to whom they attribute sorrows and joys, they believe that there is one God in heaven who commands the others. He cares only for heavenly matters, while the others perform their divided duties, which come from him, and the more powerful each one is, the more closely related he is to him. This note is often questioned because it allegedly attributes Christian views to the Slavs. I do not deny that there may be ancient or Christian influences in the way it is expressed, but the core itself, that is the claim that there is a supreme God alongside secondary demons, probably reflects the actual situation. As a parish priest among the Slavs, Helmholtz had more opportunities than anyone else to penetrate the dying faith of his flock. As we know, he was aware of the differences between the Slavs, noting that only in certain areas temples were built and images of gods made. Even linking secondary demons with a superior god is not impossible, since we find the same thing among the Mari people, who deified the separate attributes of the sky god, goodness, greatness, dominion over the world, not to mention the demons that made up his retinue. The distinctiveness of these new deities can be taken so far that each of them is offered sacrifices under a different tree of the sacred grove. Something similar could very well have been the case with the Slavs. I therefore see no reason to believe that the Slavs persisted in their paganism until the end, believing only in demons and unaware of higher-order gods and a single supreme god, contrary to Weenek. The cult of the sky, sun, thunder. This raises the question of what kind of god this was. Was it a pure abstraction, or was it associated with some object or phenomenon of the real world? Here, we can probably use analogous relationships among other Indo-European peoples. Comparative studies have led to the conclusion that in the original religion of the Indo-Europeans, the god of the clear sky, who was also the father of the world, came to the fore as the supreme god. His attributes often included power over thunder, which may also have been the case among the Slavs, as Procopius' words seem to suggest. However, it is possible that some Eastern Slavs had a separate god of thunder, the Russian Perun. Traces of belief in the god of the sky are very faint among today's Slavs, probably because ideas about him have been supplanted by concepts associated with the Christian god, who is, after all, also the Lord of the heavens. The cult of the god of the sky was often intertwined with the cult of the sun god among various peoples, and this was probably also the case among the Slavs. It is not known whether these two deities can be completely separated from each other, or whether they were one and the same, with the emphasis placed on one or the other depending on the situation. After all, we cannot demand a precise theological distinction from the Slavs. If we wanted to establish the Catholic belief system on the basis of a conversation with a peasant from a remote village, we would probably come to surprising conclusions. However, it is possible that sun worship came to the fore because it is very clearly evident, or until recently was evident, in the beliefs of the Slavic people. Mashinsky gives many beautiful examples in the aforementioned Cultura Ludova Słovian folk culture of the Slavs Fifth. However, it is difficult to repeat all of this here, so it would be better if readers who are more interested in the subject refer to the book for further details. It should be emphasized, however, that it is quite difficult to clearly distinguish whether a peasant worships the sun as a god, or, for example, prays to the Christian god at sunrise. It seems that the old pagan practices merged with Christian ones, especially since Christianity, before it came to us, Slavs, Poles, absorbed various elements of sun worship in southern and western Europe. The peasant's attitude towards the sun is characterized by humble reverence, but at the same time love, as evidenced by the use of affectionate expressions. Swanko little son, Swaneczko another version of little son, since Polish language has many types of diminutive, Svente Swaneczko holy little son, Jasny Swaneczko bright little sun, or Baj divine little sun. The peasant speaks in exactly the same way. Jezusiczek Jesus in diminutive, or Pombuszek God in diminutive, Bajacek different version of God in diminutive, etc. Here is an example of a short prayer, one could say jubilate, or greeting to the rising sun, recorded in southern Greater Poland. Here in translation. I welcome you, sun, on this day, so that I may work happily today. Here the sun is the giver of grace, as if it were God. We find a similar situation in the prayer of a Ukrainian woman. Here in translation. Good morning, bright sun. You are holy, you are bright and beautiful, you are pure, wonderful and honorable, you illuminate the mountains and valleys and high burial mounds, illuminate me. Before the whole world. With Christian goodness, beauty, grace and love. How bright, magnificent and beautiful you are, may I also be so bright, magnificent and beautiful. The fusion of paganism and Christianity is evident in a prayer from Richwald near Zywijk. Here in translation. Welcome, welcome, rose-colored sun, welcome, heavenly treasure which shines upon us, poor people on earth. How beautiful and shining you are, sent directly from God. May Jesus Christ be praised for you. The sun is, of course, only God's creation, but it is respected and deserves special worship. It is entirely possible that 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, the sun was addressed in the same way, but in place of the Christian God, there was a god of the sky, unknown to us by name, whose position faded over time in the face of the growing importance of the sun, an element that is more visible and active than the sky, until finally both gave way to the Christian God. It is noteworthy that as late as 1914, Bulgarians in a certain village were able to say about the sun. It is our God and saint, it gives us life, protects us from evil, and when it sets, we are left orphaned without a protector. Just as the cult of the sun was mixed with the cult of the sky on the one hand, On the other hand, it was mixed with the cult of fire. Apparently, even in some remote corners of Slavic lands, the sun is simply considered a great fire in the sky. The people's attitude towards fire is similar to that towards the sun. A strong and sincere attachment, combined with deep, serious reverence based on fear. Here, too, the cult of fire was mixed with the Christian cult, because fire and light are symbols of Christ. For specific examples, I refer again to Mashinsky. I will limit myself to a short prayer from Zywik region. Here in translation. Holy fire, treasure of God, never let us become impoverished. It is highly likely that this combination of sky, lightning, sunfire can be accepted as the supreme deity of Slavic paganism. A researcher called it symbolic unity, accusing Bruckner of not understanding this. All these were manifestations of a mysterious power that gave life and fertility, something of great importance in an agricultural and livestock breeding society, but this power could also punish if insulted. Historical sources provide evidence of the worship of the sun, fire, and thunder, and although these sources are vague in general, they are nevertheless clearer than others. I am referring to the aforementioned statement by Procopius about the belief in the god, the ruler of thunder, and further references in Russian sources, and by the Arab Ibn Raste, who says that all Slavs are worshippers of fire. It is telling that it is precisely these deities, which stand out in the sources and can claim universality in Slavic culture, that can be linked to the complex of Svarog, Sverzhets Dajbug, and Perun. And one more general issue needs to be raised here. Namely, Helmold says, the Slavs commit a strange mistake, for at feasts and when drinking, they pass around a cup over which they utter words of incantation and even curses, invoking the names of good and evil gods, believing that good fortune rests in the hands of the good god and misfortune in the hands of the evil god. That is why in their language they call the evil god the devil, or Tsarnabug black god. These few sentences sparked a heated debate. Whether dualism, the struggle between the god or gods of good and the god of evil, really played a more significant role in the religion of the Slavs. Some were very tempted to use Helmold's words to link Slavic beliefs to the well-known dualism in the religion of Zoroaster. This is not impossible in itself, because the Slavs undoubtedly had contacts with Iranian peoples. Some of them, Scythians, Sarmatians, etc., lived in the vicinity of the Slavs in the Black Sea steppes, and there are even traces of Iranian influence in the religious vocabulary of the Proto-Slavic language. In particular, the word bug god, originally meaning wealth, changed its meaning to the one we know today only in Proto-Slavic and Iranian. It is generally assumed that it was the Slavs who adopted the new meaning from the Iranians. On the other hand, the undoubted influence of Christian concepts on Helmold's words is evident, which is immediately apparent in the use of the word devil. Furthermore, Helmold is unable to name the god of good, as the so-called Bayawabug, white god, sometimes quoted in mythological treatises, is a rather late invention of chroniclers. The name Sarnabug itself is strikingly different from all other names of gods, so it is probably Helmold's own translation. Helmold probably heard something about the Slavs' belief in a personified fate Dola, and combined it with Christian ideas, which may have already been permeating the Slavs. In my opinion, this is the core of his story. In this case, we must abandon any connections with the Iranians, as the foundations are too fragile. The Slavic names for evil spirits were Bais and Chart, which are very different from Tsarnabug.